Hello again, and welcome to the next panel session. I'm Pablo, the polar bear or the squirrel, depending on how you see it. I'm from the Games academic team at ESNE, and I'll be your host for this session, where the topic is the power of video games to convey social, cultural, and political ideas, and how to make visible characters and situations that are usually hidden. Perhaps a key word is interactivity of agency, the agency of the player in the game and vice versa, and in relation to responsibility and to empathy. In the OASIS exhibition, there are a few video games of this type, Nanopesos, Atuel, and This War of Mind. Perhaps a salient example is the game Papers, Please, which sounds like the motto of an academic evaluation agency, but no, it's a game where the player has to decide who can cross a border under a dictatorial regime. So I'm going to present the panelists first, because I threw a dice and it came first. Pablo Quarta, if I'm right, is an Argentinian narrative designer. He's the co-founder of the Juegos blog. The blog is aimed at Spanish speakers, and among other things, it discusses the connection between video games, culture, and politics. So a warm welcome to you, Pablo. Thank you for coming. The second participant is Agustina Isidori, Argentinian-Italian, I think, designer. She's also a visual artist. She's based in Montreal, and she has created the game Sola, which embodies the dreadful experience of walking alone at night in cities where gender-based violence is embedded in everyday life. And finally, Paolo Pedercini is an Italian-American. He only allows us to know, as he says on his website, that he teaches experimental game design and media production courses at Carnegie Mellon University's School of Art. And he's well known for his games project Mole Industria. A warm welcome to the three of you. Before I let you start with your presentations, don't miss the video games exhibited by our final year students on the Matching Games website. The exhibition is also taking place live simultaneously with this OASIS event. So I'll start with Agustina and then with Paolo and finally with Pablo. Agustina, would you please share with us your views and experiences on the topic of the discussion? The screen is yours.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pablo, for the introduction. I want to start by thanking Lujan for inviting me to participate in this panel. It's really a super interesting experience to be here with you discussing today. So I want to start by situating myself. As Pablo very well said, I'm a visual artist from Argentina. I'm currently based in Montreal, in Quebec, since 2013, more or less. And I have a background in film studies and photography. My practice has always been, throughout my life, has always been cinema, video installations, photography, and so on. I deal with questions related to difficult knowledge, more specifically gender-based violence, trauma, care, and so on. So when Lujan proposed me to be part of this panel, I spent some time wondering how I could contribute to this discussion from my own knowledge and my practice, right? So today we're discussing things related to interactivity, agency, empathy, and we're discussing how video games can be incredible tools to work through social issues. And I want to just share with you some a short sentence from the prompt proposed for the panel today. And I'm going to quote, it says, what happens when you are responsible for the actions you take in the game, right? So we're talking about responsibility today and taking actions. So thinking about responsibility for the actions that we take took me back to the very beginning of the conception of my game, a video game Sola, which is shown today at ESNE. And I'm going to take the next 9 to 8 minutes to talk, to share with you how I reflected on the ideas of action, taking actions, making choices, and the responsibility in the creation of this project. So as I said before, I used to work mostly with video installations, reflecting on topics such as feminicide, street harassment, violence, and the public space. So going to the game Sola, this project, the idea is to embody this climate of tension, discomfort, and fear that can be experienced when we are walking at night in cities where gender-based violence is really part of our everyday life. And this is based on my experience. So Sola really talks and reflects on those very small, everyday decisions, choices that I used to take when I was walking alone at night in a city where I felt unsafe. I grew up in Buenos Aires and I lived there for like 26 years. And we can discuss why I felt unsafe, but that's, I think, completely for another panel, another discussion. But basically, I felt unsafe because I was told to feel unsafe. I was told that it was my responsibility to be careful. So when I talk about decisions that we take, or that I used to take when I was walking alone at night, I'm talking about, for example, do I take the bus to get back home? Do I take a taxi? Do I run? Do I walk? Do I let someone know that I'm on my way just in case I never make it? What am I wearing? Is it okay to walk? Is it safe to walk if I'm wearing like this? I'm wearing this. So this decision-making process was something that is very much part of my everyday life, right? And I realized that it was something that we all shared. And I'm talking about my circle of friends and family. It was sort of, it was a choreography of walking back home. So I'm gonna share the screen now, just to show you the game that I'm talking about. This is just, you can see the Vimeo link, right? Just not if you, yes, good, thank you. Good. You can still see it, perfect. So the first version of this game, which is not longer how it's set up right now, but the first version of this game was developed in between 2016 and 2018 as part of a research creation project that I was developing. So the first version of this game started with the quote, the text saying we were taught, so we were told to be afraid, we were told to be afraid of the stranger, we were told to walk with fear. We were told or taught, we learned that it was our responsibility to not be harassed, raped, or even killed. So with this project, I really wanted to reflect on these everyday small decisions that we take, but also I wanted to kind of like ask myself, why am I responsible? Why is that responsibility on me? Why do I have to carry this burden of being afraid? Why is it just my job, right? Another thing that I found extremely interesting in the use of video games, and I'm gonna share with you a little anecdote in relation to this. So as I told you, like I've been living in Buenos Aires for like 25, 26 years. Then I moved to Montreal, to Canada, and I guess like after a year living here, one night I was walking. I went out with some friends, and at some point, I don't know, 2, 3 a.m. we decided to call it a night. And my friends offered me, they said like, we're taking a taxi. Do you want to come with us? And I said, I was like, you know, it's a mid-July summer night in Canada, which is something that when you live in Canada, you cannot take for granted. So I was like, you know what? I wanna walk. So, and I did, and I decided to walk, and I walked back home like around like 30 to 40 minutes. And halfway, I kind of like realized, what is this? What is this freedom of just like deciding to walk alone at night at 2 a.m. in the morning? What is this like lightness that I feel in my body? And with this, I just want to take a second to acknowledge that I am not trying to say that Montreal, Canada is this like fairy tale safe place for everyone. I just want to acknowledge that it can be, there are many people who suffer from different forms of violence, harassment. So I think that's important to mention. So going back to this absence of fear, right? This absence of fear that allowed me to be aware of the cognitive process, this decision-making process of walking alone at night. So I wanted to understand this. I wanted to really break it down and understand this experience of walking. And I was kind of like exploring different mediums. As I said, I work mostly with video. And I suddenly realized that video games were just like this amazing tool, fascinating tool that could allow me to really break down this decision-making process, to really reflect on that specific moment in which you choose to take the avenue instead of taking the park, even if the avenue takes like 10 minutes more walking, but the park is like just like, so those, I wanted to become aware of that moment, of the moment before the decision is made. And also another thing that I found fascinating in video in the development of this project was the possibility of embody an experience of really thinking about my body and how my body felt, because it's definitely not the same to walk when your hands are like this or when your hands are like this. It's not the same to walk with your shoulders and your chest tense like this or to walk like this. It's a very different experience. Your feet feel different, your hands, your shoulders, your chest. So this creative process really, and the idea of like going from the idea of like just working with video to working in this like idea of like there's interaction in the player will have to choose things. It was really a process of remembering and like self-understanding, and that's one of the things that I really appreciated the most of this project, of this process. So basically collecting data from this sensory memory to understand how did I feel. And I was working with a developer at the time. He was a colleague of mine, and he would ask me, he was a gamer, and he had a lot of knowledge, and he would ask me things such as, so what is the goal? What is the goal of the player? Are we taking the player home? Is that the end of the game, the player going home? What is the start? What is the end? And all of these exchanges allowed me really to reflect on my experience, but also reflect on the topic that I was researching. Because, for example, what are the implications of choosing to take the player home? Like, am I saying that home is a safe place? If I'm talking about gender-based violence, can I say that getting home is a safe place? Because we know that many people experience violence in their homes. So, or another example that my colleague used to ask, what if he would say like, what if we create this like safe place for the player to just like experience some sort of safety, and he would propose to add a sort of like police station, which for me was like, no, like that's like not how I felt when I was, I don't know, in my 20s, and I was walking back home and I would like pass like a police station at 5 a.m. That was like absolutely not a feeling of safety and comfort. So
Thank
all
you.
of this.
Agustina, I think the time is up for the presentation. Can you wind up?
Yes, absolutely. So when it came to this idea of like, do I have a minute?
Yeah, just 1 minute.
Well, so the idea of like thinking of what is the end, it became really clear for me that the whole point was I was really looking to evoke discomfort, to evoke uncertainty, and to evoke frustration. So to think about how does it feel to walk in this way. It also helped me to think of like this idea of responsibility, and I think it was never meant to be our responsibility, right? It was always a bigger problem, that a problem that was in hands of much bigger institutions. We're talking like the state, the families, educations, to choose to not naturalize violence, to not naturalize a system that that allows violence and harassment to be part of our everyday life. So just to wrap up, as I said, like, it was never going back to this question of like, what is the end of the game? It was always clear to me that there was no end, that it is an ongoing problem. And I think this project allowed me to, this project, I think it's a sort of like key that opens doors for dialogue, for reflection, and for this kind of panels, I think. And that's why I'm really grateful to be here.
Okay, thank you, Agustina, for your presentation and for your talk. Now we move on to Paolo. Paolo, you have a control of the screen right now, so please, when you wish.
All right, can you see it?
We do, yes.
Okay, let me see if I can see you. 1 second. Well, you know what? I'm just gonna start. All right. Scream if something goes wrong. All right, I wish I had something so focused as Agustina, but instead I'm just gonna throw a whole bunch of things. You still see it, right? All right, so most of my work is released under a project named Molindustria, which means soft industry and soft factory. And it's mostly a personal project, but I sometimes collaborate, and it's mostly really just a bunch of games. And Molindustria is about the intersection of ideology and electronic entertainment. And since 2003, I made like 40 and 45 games and projects that you see, most of them here in roughly chronological order. And I started in Flash, but moved to all sort of formats. And when I have to summarize my work in 10 minutes or so, I usually start from these 3 approaches or themes that I always come back to when making games. One is playing systems, like the idea that there is a systemic approach of making games or talking about games, which starts from a theory that games are systems of rules. This is not one of my games, this is Prison Architect. But games are systems of rules, they are computational systems, and games, and especially simulation games, force you to approach a problem with a critical attitude, and I'd even say an ecological attitude, because in games, the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And you have to proceed by trial and error, and you have to figure out the internal cause and effect relationships and negotiate this emergent behavior. And so this is what I mean by holistic and ecological thinking, regardless of what the game actually says. So to try this idea back like a million years ago, when most of you weren't even born, I guess, 2005, I decided to make a game for McDonald's, which is a management game in which you control the production process from pasture to marketing of the fast food industry. And I should say I made it without their permission, because I wanted to include what you do usually see in this kind of games, which are the negative externalities, such as pollution and unhealthy food and growth hormones, deforestation, bad jobs, and so on. Basically, all the documented social and environmental costs of the fast food industry. And I continued like with the same approach with another project called Oligarchy, which was about kind of like the relationship between politics and oil industry. Some of the references are dated, but it's still like kind of like works as a framework. It's so much about like the basically like corrupting or bribing the political class, especially like in the North American scenario, to pass laws that are allowing you to maximize profit and so on. Another example is to build a better mousetrap, which is another management game that this one doesn't point to a specific industry or process. It's more like an abstract production process under capitalism. And it's very much kind of like enacting or like dramatizing the tension between labor, automation, and innovation in this very like simplified one screen only drag and drop situation. You have to decide whether you want to automate your process or automate product and replace worker with robots and computers and move them around between knowledge workers and industrial workers and so on. And also like this sort of like systemic approach doesn't necessarily mean that the games are systemics themselves. I think, or another example is this phone story, which was a game for iPhones and Google's smartphones that was itself about the production process of consumer electronics, in particular the phones themselves. So the game sort of like takes you through a series of vignettes, and you can sort of like hear the phone itself sort of like speaking to you.
Illegal traffic.
In a kind of like educational kind of way. I don't know if
like most electronic gadgets, this phone was assembled in China, inside a factory as big as a city.
So like there are like 4 vignettes that are representing and sort of like satirizing, we're using dark humor, certain different issues and different like steps of the production process of a smartphone, showing like, like the various problem of technological consumerism or e-waste in Southeast Asia and so on. So that's what I mean by sort of like,
I think we've lost the connection with Paolo. Lujan, maybe we should, okay. Maybe Pablo, you can take on from this. Okay. Yeah, Paolo, can you take on, and we'll come back to Paolo when he gets his connection in place.
Yeah, sure. This is a strange place to start, but I'll try to make it work. Thank you so much again, Lujan, and the organizers of the event for inviting me to talk and for showcasing our game as well. I'm gonna share my presentation now. Please let me know if you can see it. Just give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Perfect. So my name is Pablo Quarta. I'm a producer, writer, and narrative designer. And I am a part of Matajuegos, which is a game dev co-op in Argentina. We focus on thinking and creating games from social, political, and cultural perspectives that are informed by our Latin American contexts and identities. We started out as a collective towards the beginning of 2016, and last year we became a co-op, and we've been known for translating articles from indie game devs and game critics into Spanish, for creating video essays, for writing our own articles about the Argentine game industry, for creating weird podcasts, and for making small, personal, and experimental games. And throughout the years, we've certainly also created activist games. Most of these have been about social and political issues in Argentina, like, for example, the legalization of abortion, which was voted on in the Argentine Congress in 2018 and 2020 when it finally passed. And for both occasions, we created a virtual march to support the legalization and the people marching on the streets. And we invited people to send us drawings of themselves, of their characters, of their avatars, to march digitally alongside the physical marches in Buenos Aires. And over 200 people participated in both events and marched digitally alongside us. And we've also made games, for example, about being a Latin American teen dealing with issues of gender identity and gender roles. This was a narrative card game about social and emotional intelligence we made, dealing with those issues. We've also made games about unions and unionizing and the exploitation of workers. And we actually made this game with actual labor organizers from different parts of the world, and it was a great experience working with them. And lately, and we even made a game about one of our ex-presidents being ousted from office after days of massive public protest. This was a Flappy Bird clone, because the president had to escape the protests by leaving in a helicopter. And this happened in 2001 during the Argentine economic crisis. And lately we've been working on a game called The 12, which is showcased at OASIS right now and has been showcased this week. And if you're in Madrid, please, we'd love it if you could try it out and let us know what you think. And at 12, I'm gonna put on the trailer now just so I have it on in the background while I talk. At 12 is a surrealist documentary game, which I don't believe is an actual genre of game, but it's certainly what we made. It's a game in which you traverse dreamlike landscapes that are based on the actual topography of the Atoll River Valley in Argentina. You shapeshift and take on different forms, changing between different animals like foxes and condors, and different elements like clouds and water. As you listen to interviews with real life people, they're usually people who live in the Atoll River Valley, or specialists like biologists, historians, geologists who talk about the history of the Atoll River and of the region. And through the combination of the exploration, the shape-shifting, and the interviews, we try to weave a narrative that is about interconnected perspectives, different interconnected perspectives, some which are human, some which are not human. And the narrative that emerges is a narrative about the ecosystem of the, of the Atoll River Valley. There, I was trying to switch the slide. The narrative that emerges is the narrative of the ecosystem of the Atoll River Valley and of the history of the region and the intimate connection, the intimate historic connection of the people that live there with the land and the river, and how all of that is being affected by climate change. That's kind of the rug pull there. It's a beautiful game about something that's actually quite terrible. And we had a lot of help making this game from an actual documentary team called the 1201 Project. They're an international documentary team that focuses on telling stories about environmental preservation. And they're actually making their own documentary about the atoll. It's a film, it's not a surrealist documentary game, which I think is not as bold of them, but it's actually quite beautiful. They're doing amazing work. And the interviews you hear in our game are interviews from their project that they gave us, and we cut, we edited, transcribed, and translated. And a lot of the sounds you hear in the game, the sounds of animals, of birds, of the river, of the wind, are actually recordings they made on site. And now that I've kind of brought these pictures and these images of the actual Atoll River Valley, I want to get a little more specific before going back to the game about what the actual situation is in the atoll, with the atoll. So, like many rivers and bodies of freshwater across the world, climate change is affecting the Atoll River. There's something particular about the atoll, is that once it flows from the Andes Mountains, it actually has to cross a huge desert, because a lot of center-west Argentina is desert. And historically, through the irrigation of the Atoll River and of the Amante River, which is another river in the region, an oasis has been created and maintained for centuries in the region. This is where has been maintained in the region, and since the Incas, this is where most of the population of the region has lived, even though it's a very small part of the surface in comparison to the surface of the desert. And it's not only great for human settlement, it's also great for agriculture. And the province of Mendoza, where the majority of this oasis is actually well known internationally and regionally for its vineyards, for its olive trees, and for all kinds of agriculture that have made it a gastronomical and exportation powerhouse in the region. And the issue is the way it's being affected now by climate change is that because there is less snow up in the Andes Mountains, that means there is less runoff, and therefore there is less water in the river. And this means that slowly the that oasis is drying up and is receding. And that means that people have had to start leaving because there's less land, inhabitable land, the agriculture business is slowing down, and there's a legitimate and big concern that unless something changes, this is going to be eventually the end of that oasis and of that oasis that has lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. And this is a very clear-cut situation, which I believe if we could, theoretically speaking, take into a kind of activist game, kind of like Paolo was talking about, that thinks about ecological, that systemizes the situation and this setting and gives the player agency over to try to figure out a solution, or tries to manage the different elements of it and see how they affect the situation. That is not really what our game is about, what A12 is about. A12 isn't really an activist game in the same sense that some of our other games are activist games. It doesn't have a call to action. It doesn't present a clear-cut conflict. It doesn't present a fight or a cause or even a solution. A12 is more, I think its intention is to be a less direct, it's less direct activism. It's about narrating the ecological and cultural, the ecological and human culture of the region, and showing glimpses of its past, of its present, and of its future, in order to tie those things to global issues of climate change and of ecological preservation. And because it is a surrealist game in a lot of ways, a lot of this comes in through the senses, comes in through the audiovisual experience. And while we try to layer the different perspectives that you start to integrate as a player while you play the game and start to see the situation from a lot of multifaceted and different views, it's not as logical perhaps as some of the games that Paolo was showing. It's an experience that's meant to wash over you and kind of try to get you, at least for a moment, to feel something close to a bond that someone who lives there might feel. And that's more or less what I have to say. I'm not very good at conclusions, so I'm just going to put up my contact information. And if you're very upset that there isn't a better conclusion, please write to me. I'll be happy to apologize to you via email or on Twitter. And that's it.
Very, very well done. I mean, we don't need a conclusion. We can conclude the talk. Thank you very much, Pablo. Those graphics are very beautiful. Paolo, you're back online. Would you like to take it from your
I'm gonna try. All right.
Where you are.
Can you see it? All right. Yeah. No, the conclusion is when does it come out, Pablo?
Well, you can conclude if you want to, and we can have a conclusion about the whole panel at the end.
Yeah, all right. Okay, so yeah, I was talking about, so I think I froze at the point of awkward role play. So basically, this is another approach that I've been talking about and I've been using, I keep coming back. The idea that games has this relationship with power that are often power fantasies, and I like to complicate this idea. Not unlike what Agustina was talking about in her game, that is about like putting you in a difficult situation, right? It's not as mechanical as, the empathy idea, but it's part of that conversation, I think. So for example, in this game, every day listening dream, you're this like anonymous sort of like white collar worker stuck in a time loop essentially of everyday routine, and you have to figure out ways to get out of it. Or a more another one, perhaps more ambitious one, is a man's in which you are playing the role of a drone pilot that is carrying over this life, sort of like a split between ordinary daily, routine in suburban Las Vegas and piloting, controlling a remotely drone in Pakistan. And yeah, it's kind of like a narrative game, and it's sort of like through dialogues and sort of like little vignettes is sort of like tackling different aspects of robotic warfare. This was from 2012. A third approach, like in the last 10 years, I've been gradually moving away from the idea of quote unquote raising awareness of certain issues, which is what a lot of culture, even mainstream culture today does all the time, more toward the idea of making games that are made for people who are socially engaged already, that are already somewhat activated, or at least that they are very well aware that there is something wrong with capitalism, or that something needs to be done about climate change. And therefore, like the question is more not like what is the issue, but more like what can I do about it, or how can I do about it? And some examples was this collection of short analog games that are not computer games called Casual Games for Protesters, a collaboration between me and a poet and performer called Harry Giles, Josephine Giles. And it's a collection of non-digital games to be played during marches, rallies, and demonstrations. So when sort of like activism is already happening, and the idea is to make this perhaps the social situations more meaningful or less I guess like routine or less, I would say like boring, because sometimes, protesting for several days, several weeks in a row can become like exhausting. And so like an idea, like small, little activities that you can do either individually or in small groups to, make these experiences more fun or meaningful or interesting or unexpected. And some of them are, for example, in this one is meant to teach the gesture language used for consensus decision-making during the Occupy Wall Street protest. So that's like a little game that teaches you that. And a similar sort of like approach is this tabletop role-playing game, which is like a very simplified, quick storytelling game called Rules and Roberts, which is essentially an educational game that is meant to teach Robert's Rules of Order, which is a set of parliamentary procedures that are used by unions, parliaments, church groups, especially in North America, but I think there are similar things a little bit all around the world. They're basically rules to make decisions in large groups, right? And so it's basically combining this Byzantine and completely old and stuffy rule set with the kind of like, to me, equally stuffy and Byzantine rule set of Dungeons and Dragons like game. So it's basically like you're running this adventures and the catch is that every time you're making a decision that can affect everybody's lives, you have to sort of like go through basically a democratic process. So you cannot just say, I'm attacking a dragon, but you have to propose to attack the dragon and go through a very specific process that is mirroring this parliamentary process. And you have to vote and make amendments. Eventually at the end, you end up voting. So this one, more recent one, and then concluding the Democratic Socialist Simulator that is, I think, part of the exhibition this event is related to, has a less practical use. This is a more like standard, actually commercial game. Yes, can be played by anybody because the issues are common or similar to many countries, but it was meant to exist in a very specific electoral moment, and it's called Democratic Socialism Simulator. So it's already sort of like self-selecting its audience and be like, yes, you gotta have to be democratic socialism oriented already. So essentially like left or at the very least center left or curious about it in order to play. Otherwise it doesn't have anything. It's not really trying to convince you about anything else. Yeah, it was basically like let's see play as the first democratic socialist president of the United States. So think about Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez if you're following US politics in today's circumstances. And it's really meant to propose to kind of like illustrate the electoral program that was proposed by the Bernie Sanders coalition that is still essentially on the table. So your goal is to redistribute power and wealth while addressing the climate crisis and negotiating priorities and trying to get reelected. And the gameplay is modeled after the series called Reigns. So it's basically a semi-random binary choices that are prompted by advisors. So it's text-based and it's got like resource management with a little bit of like bits of narratives embedded into it. Yeah, so check it out. This is, I really wish I could show a bit of what I've been working on in the last year or two, but it's a big project and it's not quite ready to be presented, to be revealed yet. So stay tuned. This is all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Paolo. Very interesting. You have a great sense of irony. Some of the projects you presented are very intelligent in the way they can convey the message. So I have a few tough questions for you from some people. The first I'd like to address is, how can we make these video games themselves more visible and relevant in an overcrowded games space? Are they preaching to the already converted, or how can we make them more visible? Who would like to start? Anyone has an idea? Maybe Pablo, you were last, so now you could go first if you have a way to answer that difficult question.
Yeah, I'm not too hopeful, to be honest. I'm very cynical these days about the idea of activist games managing to capture attention unless they somehow manage to sneak or present themselves as mainstream commercial games, which is really where the greatest amount of attention is. I think just the idea that there is a space for experimental and political games to be showcased at festivals or to be played among other game developers is a lot, considering the state of things. I think what Paolo's approach in a certain sense, the idea of making games for activists, is certainly a way of getting more attention, not necessarily from gamers, which might not be the audience that we want to target anyways, but from other people who are already politically engaged and who are interested in exploring those subjects in different ways, or want to look at those issues in different ways. And maybe video games can help them to do that, or engage them in a particular way. I don't know how Paolo feels about that. I feel like maybe what his experience is making those types of games.
Yeah, that's definitely sort of like what I was hinting at in the last part of the, I think the only solution, it is an overcrowded market, but it is overcrowded only if you have like very lofty commercial ambitions and if you are basically targeting everybody. And so to me, there are like so many strategies and so many ways to sort of like select or to make something meaningful for like a smaller audience, but more meaningful for a smaller audience, like by targeting for example people who are already engaged, or maybe like targeting people who are already part of a community, a certain geographical area. So if Pablo's game will be like meaningful for the people living in that area, or next to it, or that to me will be already a success, regardless of the numbers, the global sale numbers. So that's to me the main strategy, and maybe it's a way to cope about with
okay. That. What's your point of view, Agustina, about this?
So I think my point of view, maybe it's more of the in the arts, I guess, because I've never really like thought about this particular project that is the game that I showed today. I've never thought about making it, like commercial, or of thinking of bigger audiences. I was already working within academia, and I was already working within communities that share my very similar concerns. So I was already in that circle, and I think that helped me a lot. when it comes to make it visible, because I also like, I think it also came with a lot of like, I guess, testing and within universities. So that's kind of like the way that it's spread in a way, I think. So I guess it's more or less what you were saying about like focusing on what community. So who are we talking to? Who are we trying to address? So I guess like if you're telling the story about a community, start with that community, I guess. Or yeah, I think that's a way of seeing it.
Okay, thank you. We have another tough question here. It says the medium can be used by anyone. It can be turned by anyone into a powerful medium for propaganda, for example. I mean, can you imagine games being used to convey a negative political or cultural message and hope not be successful somehow? Yeah. Please go on, Paolo.
Well, I guess that depends on your view of the status quo, which, you know, commercial video games tend to uphold. You know, certainly there's a lot to be said about gun violence and the game industry's role in maintaining it or promoting the military industry and the guns industry. Certainly video games, I mean, it's not necessarily that video games are powerful enough to on their own promote a negative idea or negative ideology, but they certainly reinforce the ones that are already out there and have already gained public consciousness, or are already in effect due to, you know, power structure, social power relations that already exist.
So that's a good answer. I mean, your answer is they already do, some of them. So we already have them. Some games already convey a negative message, and I guess that's why you guys are also counteracting. Anyone else wants to add something? Maybe Paolo or Agustina? No.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, it's not hypothetical. What if games were used for? Yeah, I feel like even though there is, especially in North America, kind of like, I would say, like an hegemony, to use a fancy word, of like liberal thought that is permeating even like mainstream, commercial companies that are like not now generally okay with, for example, like gay, queer, LGBT rights and things like that. Still, like most of the products are pretty much espousing militaristic fantasies, capitalistic fantasies. So it already happens almost organically, and it almost like it's pretty much baked in most of the genres. So even if you are not like a right-wing activist, by kind of like choosing to adopt the certain systems and certain mechanics, you're pretty much already doing the work of propagating, upholding certain ideas.
Do you want to add something, Agustina, or should I?
Yeah, I'm thinking about this idea of like a negative, in a negative message or in a negative way. When I was doing my research for this project, and as I said, like I come from a very different background. So for me, it was like, okay, there's like this whole universe that I have to discover now. And I was doing research about like video games, video game experiences that dealt with gender-based violence. And I found things that were extremely problematic, basically because some of the experiences were actually about like making decisions, but making decisions in a way that was just like portraying the same message that I was trying to criticize. Kind of like, you're in a party and you're a woman and you have to choose if you drink 2 glasses of beer or 3, or if you go with this guy or not. Kind of like putting again the responsibility on my shoulders. And then I found, I found very problematic. And then this project was done by students in a university. And then I found other projects that were basically, again, talking about violence with more violence, that was something that I wanted to break in the game that I did. That there's basically nothing really happens. There's nothing who's coming to assault you or like aggress. Like there's no one really that. There's people in the street and you can make your own assumptions about them, but that's up to you player, right? No one is really coming to. So I found a lot of that. I found a lot about problematic messages, or just like talking about violence with more violence, which for me was, okay, let's find other ways.
Okay, that's a great answer as well. And there are many related issues like the evidence of violence related to video games, which we are not going to get to in this talk. But I have a question here from someone who is asking, how can I start, if I want to do or create a socially engaged video game, where do I start? Can you give a student some sort of advice of where to start or where to look? Maybe Paolo could answer, and then Agustina, and finally Pablo in the beginning.
Yeah, I will maybe, this is a bit of a dilemma for me because I'm teaching games in a university and I never really tell my students to make socially engaged games because I think it's a bit too hard. Maybe I wouldn't start with something like that as your first project, but that's kind of what I did. So I would say, try to pick your audience and see where it would exist, you know, like what we say before, like how it will function, like what level of radicalization or activation are your players meant to be, and try to be as specific as possible, and by doing so, like in the sense of covering maybe like issues or topics or perspective that have not been already covered before. To me, it's not a problem to be, preaching to the choir is fine as long as you give the choir something new and not just like reinforcement of what people already know or believe in. So I will. Today, in 2022, I will start from considerations of essentially audience and context. And then I will move from that to, the kind of genres that you are interested. I think there are like huge differences between making a game that is more like system-based versus a storytelling game, or versus like, physical game, board game.
Thank you, Paolo. And Agustina, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I think my answer is probably like very unhelpful, but I don't know how to answer that question, because I don't know how to start from there, how to start from I want to create a socially engaged video game, or what any other piece of
maybe you could tell us what drive you, and what was your
sense of urgency,
a
sense of like I need to, almost like something that was hurting, something that was like I need to answer this, but it was for myself, and that's maybe like one thing that is that's why I'm like, I don't know how helpful this can be, but for me it was this sense of like I need to get this out, I need to understand this, I need to understand. And that's the same reason why I got into this subject in the first place, like many years ago. And it was not even like I was just doing video, and I was trying to understand the experience of a very good friend of mine who lived with an unresolved trauma for like her entire adult life. And I was just trying to understand, how do you live with that? How do you live with that without even like, how do you live with that? And so for me, what helps, I guess, or for me, the way that I start is by not understanding something. And this kind of like urgency of like, there's nothing that matters to me the most that understanding this.
Yeah, so an answer that could combine yours and Paolo could be that you need to have a burning issue, and then you need to look at what's out there to see if someone else has done that, and if it's something that is new. That's a very good answer as well.
And how do you want, sorry, yeah.
No, please, go on, yeah.
No, and I guess like, how do you want to do it too, right? What are your, of course, like what's what's been done, and how do you want to talk about this, and where do you stand? Where do you stand about in relation to this? And from, I think something that for me was kind of hard to understand or like to navigate was like, why am I talking about this? Why am I talking about this particular issue?
Okay. So apart from having a great motivation to do that, we also would need some technical advice of where to start. Maybe Paolo, you could tell us a bit about how you managed to get some such beautiful graphics in your games. So where do the artists and programmers have to put the focus? On the visuals, on the message? Is there some advice that you can give them about how to combine both things to get a very nice product? If it's no, go on. Sorry.
No. I think from the technical perspective, I'm not going to be too helpful in the sense that, you know, video games are holistic. The experience needs to be thought from the ground up to be cohesive. So what your graphics are, it depends a lot on the type of experience that you're creating. And the technical side goes alongside it. I think there's been a great amount of incredible socially active games talking about deep issues and problems that have been twine games, that have been bitsy games, games that are graphically very simple, that are mechanically very simple, but have a profundity of depth of topic. So you know, a 12 stands out because it is surrealist and very pretty, and that's very much to the identity of the artist and the developer who's working on the game. But it doesn't need to be that way in order to tackle a subject matter in an interesting and profound way. And I think what Agustina and Paolo said are both right. I think if the subject matter is interesting to you, if you can do the research in order to get a profound understanding of it, and if it's something that affects you personally, I think, and you can give a personal perspective on it, I think that tends to help a lot in the moment of conveying that experience and that subject matter in an interactive medium that can sometimes, an interactive medium. And I think also, as always, start small, pick up one element or two elements of the issue and try to focus on that, especially that's all around advice, no matter how much experience you have in making games. Start small, try to keep it limited as much as you can.
Yes, that's a good answer, because I didn't address the question very well, because I focus on the graphics because they are very beautiful, but surely the mechanics and the idea and the design behind it is very important. Paolo has also some very intelligent games, and Agustina is showing us a game that I'm sure when people play it, it's capable of putting people in the position of someone who has to make a tough decision at night. So one final question. There's someone here who says, well, sometimes entities and companies use games to promote their products. Do you think the ONGs could use games in the future to promote their cause? And do you think that's something that you would do? Work for produce games for NGOs? Sorry, ONGs is in Spanish, is NGOs. So who wants to answer first? Maybe
should we go? Yeah, in order. Yeah, no. In fact, that has been happening for quite a long time, I would say. There is pretty much an entire festival devoted to that, which is called Aims for Change, which also has like international chapters, which is basically putting together foundations, no-profits, organizations, and game developers, especially game developers that are kind of like maybe not interested in doing mainstream violent games, and they want to put some consciousness into that. So they're trying to put together like the financial sustainability and doing it for a good cause, or at least a not negative cause. So check that out. That is possible. I spoke at that conference and also being, like a bit critical of that more like a NGO approach. When to me, there is a problem when that kind of work of activism is being professionalized and turned into a bit of like a corporate sort of like endeavor. Like there are issues with that, and I'm very much closer to the more like the artist sort of like feeling that something should exist in the world. I don't care if anybody will play, but if this is more important for me, important for my peers, my community, and so on. But yeah.
Thank you, Paolo. Unfortunately, I didn't notice that it's already, we are up. It's already 4:30, so we need to close. I'm sorry that I don't let you, Agustina and Pablo, finish up your ideas about this, but we have to close off. Thank you very much for all the contributions you've made. It's been very interesting. We can stay here in the Zoom room if we want to, but we have to get out of the OASIS live stream at the moment. So thank you everyone for watching as well, at home or in ESNE. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.